What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be continuing our Bow builds with our Bow Nightblade build. So like I mentioned in the earlier Warden build, Nightblades are going to be the other class that can make the most use out of the Bow build's kind of unique niche scenario, niche situation in endgame PvE environment. That is, you want to play stamina DPS, but you also want to play at range. You don't necessarily want to play it within melee range. So Nightblades their toolkits basically allow you to play that to its maximum potential, mainly because of that bow proc that you have there. Stamina Nightblades do not have a ranged spamble, so we will be using a bow ability as a main spamble, but that bow proc is very powerful and you can still use it at range, so it ends up being a pretty nice bonus to a bow build overall. However, that being said though, there are a few downsides of running a Stamina Nightblade bow build, the primary one being the lack of an execute, because your execute does require you to be within melee range, so that's just something that you're going to want to keep in mind if you do want to play a primarily bow build as a Nightblade. So, just like other build videos, we'll be going over gear, attributes, skills, everything you need to know to kind of recreate this build yourself. We'll be going over a couple of substitutions that you might make if you don't have access to certain expansions or DLCs. So this build is optimized. The one that I'm showing you is going to be optimized, but you do have some gear alternatives if you don't have access to some of this gear, or you're kind of a beginner and don't have this gear farmed up just yet. And then we'll close things off as usual with the 6-1 dummy parts, so you guys get an idea of what you're able to pull with this particular setup. So starting off first with our gear. So in terms of monster helm sets, you really only have two options if you're going to be a bow build. That's going to be either Velidreth, which I have on here, or Stormfist if you don't have access to Cradle of Shadows. So Velidreth is going to be stronger. We don't need additional regen from Stormfist, so the additional weapon damage is really nice to have from Velidreths. That being said, Velidreth does require you to aim your proc in order to make sure it actually hits the enemy. Stormfist doesn't have that same limitation because it will always proc on the enemy. The limitation of Stormfist is that if the boss decides to move out of the proc, then you basically wasted that proc's damage. So that's just something to keep in mind here. If you do have access to Cradle of Shadows, Velidreth is definitely the monster helm you want to pick up for this build. Otherwise, if you only have access to base game stuff, then the only other option is going to be Stormfist. Selene's is not going to be any good, and none of the other monster helm sets are really going to be really viable on a bow build. For our body set, we are running Relequens, so you will need to have access to Somerset in order to farm this set here. Still the strongest set in the game right now for stamina DPS, so definitely want to pick this up. I had the perfect version here. You can go with the imperfect version if you don't have a group to farm the perfected version. So the perfect version only drops from Vet +1 and up. The difference between the perfected version and the normal version is that max stamina bonus. It doesn't really add that much to DPS. You're talking maybe 1% or ish at most, so it's not that big of a deal if you don't have the perfected version instead. Now, if you don't have access to Somerset, so you don't have the Somerset expansion, then you do have some other options instead for your body set. You can go with Vicious Ophidian, that comes from any of the Cragron Shrouds. You can go with Hunding's Rage, the tried and true staple, very easy to collect. You can go with Briarheart if you can purchase those pieces off guild traders, or if you can farm them if you have access to the Redguard DLC. Those are kind of your other options there for body pieces. Now, in terms of our front bar set, you really only have two options when it comes to front bar sets. That's going to be Briarheart and Veiled Inheritance. Briarheart's going to be a little bit easier to kind of get ready, set up immediately, because Veiled Inheritance is a heavy set. You will need to transmute the jewelry. So again, Briarheart, if you don't have access to Somerset, is really one of your only options for a front bar set here. Just make sure when you're buying jewelry, if you don't have access to transmutation, then you make sure to get the robust jewelry, not the arcane or healthy jewelry. So if you do want to run Veiled Inheritance, by all means you can do so. You will have to transmute the jewelry pieces. In my experience, in my testing, Briarheart did end up pulling a little bit ahead of Veiled Inheritance, but they're both pretty close together. It wasn't that big of a difference overall, so you can go with either one of them. I did try out Leviathan briefly, but I found that Leviathan was better off as a body set compared to a front bar set, and also that obviously Relequen beat out Leviathan, but also Vicious Ophidian ended up beating out Leviathan by a small margin, so that's just something you want to keep in mind there. Leviathan is still a possible choice here for either body or front bar set, but the other sets that I mentioned typically will beat it out or are easier to obtain than Leviathan. We are going double bow, obviously, so they're both infused with poison damage enchant on our front bar, and then on our back bar we have a weapon damage enchant. Nightblades still have very good sustain overall. If you have orb support, you really won't need that absorb stamina enchant, so we're going weapon damage poison instead. You do want that additional sustain from the absorb stamina enchant. I like to have it on the back bar, but you can put it on the front bar. Doesn't really matter which one you put them on. If you have it on the back bar, it'll proc more often compared to if you put it on the front bar, but again, kind of up to you how you want to do that, if you want to go with an absorb stamina enchant that way. In terms of traits and enchants, I have 7 medium here, but you can go 6 medium, 1 heavy if you would like the additional health. Up to you if you want to do that. All of our armor pieces are divines, and we do have all max stamina enchants. If you do want some more health, you can put a max health enchant on a small piece instead. Kind of up to you and how you feel about your own survivability. In terms of jewelry, I have 3 Bloodthirsty with weapon damage enchant on all 3 of my jewelry pieces. Your other option is going to be Infused instead. Infused will give you more consistent DPS, but Bloodthirsty will give you the better DPS, generally speaking, in most scenarios. You can go with any combination of Infused and Bloodthirsty though. Obviously, if you don't have access to Somerset and you can't transmute your jewelry into those traits, then you will have to go through a bust instead. Going over our character sheets, so I am a Wood Elf here. If you are going for a pure bow build and you have no intentions whatsoever of doing a dual wield bow build or a two-handed bow build, then Wood Elf is a pretty decent option here. Redguards are another good option. You do get higher max stamina with Redguards, but you will lose that Adrenaline Rush passive if you're going exclusively bow. However, if you do decide to go Redguard, it gives you some more flexibility in case you do want to end up going back into a melee build, just because that'll basically allow you to use the Adrenaline Rush passive again. You can also go with Khajiit instead. They do get 8% additional weapon grip, but they don't get any additional max stam, so that's just something you want to keep in mind. If you have access to the Imperial Edition, then you can go with Imperials as well. They get 12% max health, 10% max stamina, so you don't have to worry about any sort of survivability issues if you are an Imperial. If you are going double bow, then that's a win for you because you already have the sustain needed to kind of, don't need to worry about the loss of an Adrenaline Rush passive if you're an Imperial. I do have 64 points into stamina. You can put a few points into health, again, if you want to improve your survivability. It's kind of up to you if you want to do that or not. In terms of Mundus Stone, going with the Lover. Ever since the changes to Night Mother's Gaze and Sunderflame a few patches ago, the Lover has pretty much been the staple Mundus Stone for all of our stamina DPS builds. And then I am using Lava Foot here for purposes of the parse to kind of emulate a raid scenario where I'm getting orbs and things like that. But your food that you should be using is either going to be Dubious Camoran Throne or Arteaum Takeaway Broth if you need sustain. You can sustain fairly decently with blue food as long as you're getting good orb support from your healers. So blue food if you have the orb support, otherwise go with Dubious Camoran Throne or Arteaum Takeaway Broth. Again, Lava Foot here is just used for purposes of emulating getting orbs in a raid scenario. It's a highly widely accepted standard for kind of testing parses among endgame PvE raiders. Now for our skills, starting off with our front bar, we have Silver Leash. We're not really using this too much. This is just for the weapon damage passive. Poison Injection, Lethal Arrow, Relentless Focus, Lightweight Beast Trap. Not using this for Minor Force. This is just for the weapon damage bonus, and then Flawless Dawnbreaker. Back bar, we have Relentless Focus again. We're not really going to be using this too much on our back bar just because the way that Relentless Focus works, the bow proc will inherit the damage of the bar it was cast on. So we do want to make sure we're casting it on our front bar as much as we can. But if we are just started our back bar rotation, then we can use this instead because we don't want to sit on the bow proc for too long. We have Razor Caltrops, Endless Hail, Leeching Strikes, and Chant Acceleration. So this is going to be our main source of minor force here. You can use Lightweight Beast Trap instead. We do have it double barred if you don't have access to the Psijic skill line, don't have Somerset for instance, but it is going to be a larger hit on your sustain just because you will end up using stamina and you will have to cast it every 6 seconds, so it is going to be a little bit more difficult to sustain, and it also changes up your rotation by a fair amount if you want to maintain minor force uptime. So I do recommend running Chant Acceleration instead because it lasts for a longer period of time. Plus, it only uses Magicka, it doesn't use stamina, so that does help out your sustain by a decent margin. Then for our ultimate, we do have Ballista here. Now I do want to mention here that we are using Lethal Arrow instead of Focused Aim. Now, Focused Aim can be used instead of Lethal Arrow if you don't have a Stamplar or a Templarian group that's running Power of the Light. Focused Aim does provide Minor Fracture, so if you don't have Power of the Light, then it is useful to have that additional Minor Fracture there. But if you do have Power of the Light, then just stick with Lethal Arrow instead. It does do more DPS over the same period of time if you do have Minor Fracture already provided for you. So Lethal Arrow is going to be the stronger option here. Now, in terms of these abilities here, again, Silver Leash and Lightweight Speed Strap are there just for the weapon damage bonus here. So you can replace these with assassination abilities for additional crit chance if you would like. But overall, the additional weapon damage is going to give you more DPS as a return overall. Silver Leash also has the additional utility of being able to pull enemy towards you, so you can help out with tanks if they need additional pulling stuff, then you can use Silver Leash instead. Now I do want to mention here that there are a couple of abilities that you might want to consider running instead of Silver Leash or Lightweight Beast Trap. We'll be losing a little bit of DPS, but overall not too much because these are damage abilities. Acid Spray or Bombard is a good option to have. This is going to be useful in dungeons or trials where you have ads that are vulnerable to snares and immobilizations. So this is nice to have for kind of more crowd control. Raining Shot, if you do need some additional heal, it's kind of up to you if you want to run this. This also has a stun, so again, not very useful for trials, but it could be potentially useful in dungeons instead. In terms of our champion points, CP cap is 810, which gives us 270 points to put across each of our different constellation types here. Starting off with our green CPs, we have 75 in the moon cap, 75 in tenacity. This gives us 120 points to put into the remaining nodes however you'd like. Kind of up to you how you want to put them in. Green CPs are kind of a flex option here. You can kind of put them however you feel comfortable with. You can go 100 moon cap, 100 tenacity. You can focus them all on dodge rolling if you'd like. It's kind of up to you, really dependent on each player. For our blue CPs, I need to change this out of Staff Expert. So there isn't going to be that much difference between a dual wield build and a bow build, so our CPs are pretty much going to be identical. So you have 64 mighty, 28 piercing, 66 precise strikes, 37 thaumaturge, then we have 66 mastered arms and 9 into physical weapons expert. For our red CPs, this particular setup I have is kind of a generic approach. You will need to shift your CP points around if you do want to maximize mitigation for any sort of specific piece of content. So again, this is kind of a more generic approach. 81 Ironclad, 61 Thick Skin, 64 into both Hardy and Elemental Defender. So that is pretty much all of our build information, so now let's go over our rotation. So rotation is pretty much more or less going to be it's a little bit dynamic because you do want to kind of focus in on the bow proc a little bit. Make sure to get those off on the front bar as much as you can. So you might need to break up your back bar a little bit depending on how you kind of want to play this out here. So I will demonstrate here on the 25 million dummy just so you guys can get an idea of what the rotation looks like. So before going into any fight at all, make sure you pre-buff yourself. You want challenge acceleration, leeching, relentless. The lethal arrow does have that cast time associated with it. I actually find that to be pretty useful in terms of being able to kind of know when to leave. I won't be using my ultimate here because we want to save it for the 6-month let me parse. But you would use your ultimate last. Now for challenge acceleration, you can bar swap cancel out of the animation at the end, so I do recommend doing that. So that was an example of when I decided to use the bow proc on the back bar rather than the front bar, because I just started my back bar rotation, so I did want to make sure to get that bow proc off. That's pretty much what the rotation more or less looks like. It's a little bit dynamic, but because you really only have 3 abilities on the back bar compared to 4, sorry, had to sneeze there. it is going to be a little bit easier to manage. You still want to kind of prioritize getting that bow proc off on the front bar because you do have a little bit higher weapon damage on the front bar rather than the back bar instead. So with all that said in mind, we're going to go ahead and do our 6-minute dummy parse so you guys can get an idea of the DPS you're able to pull. Now if you do want to compare this to the Stamina Warden build, please be mindful that we do not have Major Fracture here, so you do need to either include Major Fracture here and do the math that way and adjust your DPS, or take away Major Fracture from the Stamina Warden parse and adjust accordingly. So I will do a little bit of mental math in order to kind of give you an idea of where this would stand compared to a Stamina Warden if we did have that Major Fracture buff. So one thing to keep in mind is for a bow build is you want to try to decay as far away as possible from the enemy because of this passive known as long shots. It increases the damage you have with bow abilities depending on how far away you are. So the farthest away you can be is going to be 25 meters. So this is the range of Endless Hail. Realistically, you could go a little bit farther because it does have a 5-meter radius, but 25 meters is probably going to be the safest bet here. Now in terms of where that is in comparison to where the dummy is, it's going to be somewhere between these buoys and this rope. So these buoys are approximately 30 meters away, this rope is approximately 20 meters away, so you're just kind of somewhere in the middle here. You do want to make sure to catch the boss within your Endless Hail here. So let's go ahead and get started here with the 6-minute dummy parse so you guys get an idea of what we're able to pull. Now, because Lethal Arrow does have a cast time, it actually helps us sustain a little bit here, because we're able to regen while we're in that middle of that cast time animation. Kind of re-up chunk acceleration here. And again, it makes it really easy to kind of time when you need to hit the button in order to weave. The one thing I do want to mention here is while you're in your cast time for Lethal Arrow, you can't drink potions. That's just something to keep in mind. So if you weave very quickly like I do, you pretty much have very little time in order to use your potions. You might want to slow down that weave there in order to make sure you're drinking your potion. Again, we want to make sure we're going that bow proc on our front bar because we do have higher weapon damage on our front bar. The advantage of having Relentless focus on our back bar is if it does run out while we're on our back bar, then we can just re-up it while we're on our back bar there. Channel but then our Ballista. That time I did decide to use the bow proc on my back bar just because I still had 2 robo cooldowns there on my back bar. Again, don't need to worry about execute because our execute is melee, so we don't have an execute. Alright, so that is our DPS there. The font color is a little bit difficult to read here. It might have randomly changed on me here. But here's our parse. We did 41k. Again, this is without Major Fracture. So if we did have Major Fracture, we'd be seeing probably around a 10% or so increase in our DPS, maybe a little bit less. So we'd really be pulling probably close to about 45k or so instead. So we do have minor Berserk. So if you want to compare this to our Stamina Warden parse, Stamina Nightblade is going to be a little bit lower. We're talking probably about 2-3k lower on a solo parse, which the gap's going to increase a little bit on a raid buffed parse instead. So that's just kind of comparing those two numbers. Now compared to a Magicka DPS, you're going to be shy of the Magicka Nightblade by, again, fair margin, anywhere between like 3 to 4k DPS. But compared to other classes, other Magicka DPS, you are in a pretty good position. You're pretty much toe-to-toe with other magic DPS classes, so a bow build can be used in place of magic DPS instead. It's really dependent on whether the raid lead will allow you to bring a bow build, because they kind of have a stigma in endgame PvE, but as you can tell here, they are still capable of pulling pretty good endgame DPS, and you're capable of clearing all the content in the game with a bow build instead. Might not be optimal, but it is pretty fun, and it is a nice change in change of pace when it comes to overall what your build is going to be doing here. That is it for this build video. If you guys have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below, and I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. Hopefully you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.